Alrighty, so our objectives for this lesson, we're going to be comparing and contrasting the perspectives on multiple debates, especially in terms of the legislative branch and how the legislative branch will be set up. First one is going to be between the big states and the small states. Not big in terms of geographic size, but big in terms of population. And how are we going to set the representation in Congress? Representation in a republic, how you're going to determine how everybody is represented is a big deal. That also comes into play in our next debate, and I want you to be able to compare and contrast the perspectives of the free states in the north, slave states in the south, in terms of how they're going to set up congressional representation. Then each of these debates is met with a compromise, going back to the last lesson, and the Great Compromise, which resolves the big states, small states, 3/5 compromise, which resolves the free state versus slave state debate. And what was the impact that they had on shaping the history of the legislative branch? You could argue the history of the United States. So let's get into it. First one is the big states versus the small states. There is an argument of how are we going to set up the Congress. There was an agreement that we should have a Congress, we should have a legislative branch, we should have a branch that's in charge of making law, but, well, how are we going to set that up? Large states, large in population, they could be large geographically too, like Virginia during this time period was the largest of all 13 states. But Massachusetts, which is small geographically, would also be considered to be a big state because of its big population. So the Virginia plan and large states that it represented wanted the legislature to be based off of population. Representation should be based off of population. So every person in America should be counted equally and represented equally. Let's think of it in terms of school. Let's say they want to give pizza to every single student in the school. So they buy, I don't know, 30 pies for each class. And then each different student gets the same exact slice of pizza. Now, you might have some classes that have more kids in them that ultimately have more pizza, have more of a say, but that's because they have more students. The representation in Congress is kind of like that pizza. So states that are large have a lot more pizza, have a lot more representation, have a lot more of a say in how laws are made. States that are small have a lot less pizza, have a lot less of a say. Small states like Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, and New Jersey, what? They reflect the view of the small states. The New Jersey plan, which is proposed by William Patterson, calls for a legislature that's based on statehood. Every state should have an equal voice. Well, this is pretty much what was happening in the Articles of Confederation. That every state was absolutely equal, regardless of its population. It's the United States of America, argued as small states, not the United Big States controlling the small states. They're afraid that the big states would become tyrannical and push their agenda on the small states, and they wanted to have equality within the Union. So, to this end, they wanted, if we're doing the pizza analogy, again, they wanted every classroom to get one pie. Everyone gets the same amount of pizza, every class. So, let's say if there's a class with 30 kids, they're getting much smaller slices than a class with 8 kids. They're getting some big slices. But they said this way, every class or every state is equal. So you can imagine the big state people say, well, that's not fair. You have less people, you should have less of its say. Then in return, the small state people say, well, it's not fair what you want. You're just going to push your way around us. Why would we want to join this country? Another analogy I always like to make for the small states is look at the American flag. Each of the stars is the same size. Each of the stars is the same shape. You can't tell which star represents Texas or California or Montana or Wyoming. States with small populations and states with large populations on the flag are all equal, all the same. That's kind of what the New Jersey plan wants. They want every state to be the same. In comes this handsome fella, Roger the Shermanator Sherman. Everyone called him the Shermanator. Everyone. Handsome fella. Roger Sherman is from Connecticut. He leans more towards the small states. But he, and also with the help of Benjamin Franklin, pushed forward a compromise on this issue. And that is to have a legislature in which both plans get to have their say. What? What is this madness that you say, Roger Sherman? Well, this madness is something called the Great Compromise. And the compromise is that you have a bicameral legislature. Bicameral meaning two chambers, two parts. One building with two houses. The upper house reflects the New Jersey plan. It's made up of elites, which is something that Alexander Hamilton likes. They're appointed at this time by the state legislatures. We'll see a future amendment will change that, and now we elect our senators directly. And representation is based on statehood. If you are a state in the United States, you have representation in the U.S. Senate, and all of you are equal. Each state has 2 senators regardless of their population. So if we look back then, a state like Virginia, which had a large population, is equal to a state like New Jersey, which has a small population. If we look in terms of today, California, with like 50 plus million people, is equal in the Senate to Wyoming, which has a population in the hundreds of thousands. The other chamber is the U.S. House of Representatives. That's the lower chamber. That is reflective of the Virginia plan. It's supposed to be made up of the common people. It's often referred to as the People's House. It's based off of each state's population. Some states can have many members of the House of Representatives. Presently up to 55. Or as few as 1. So California, which has a large population, has 55 members of the House of Representatives. Has a lot more say in the House of Representatives than anybody else. Wyoming, which has a small population, only has 1 member of the House of Representatives that represents the entire state. The compromise in this is that the Senate can pass laws, the House of Representatives can pass laws, but a law doesn't get made officially until both sides agree on it. So the U.S. Senate can make a bill, which is a proposal for a law, pass it through, but if the House doesn't agree to it, then it doesn't become law. And vice versa, if the House pushes forward a bill and the Senate doesn't agree to it, then it doesn't become law. Both of them have to agree. The representation of the states and the representation of the people equally all have to agree in order for a law to be officially passed. So the compromise, what do you get? Basically, you get a voice of how you want it. For the large states, they get that every person is counted equally. For the small states, they get that every state has an equal voice. But to give up, in order to get anything done, the small states and the large states are going to have to find a way to agree with one another. To compromise. See, it keeps coming back to that. if you look at the Capitol building down there, which is in Washington, D.C., which is where Congress meets, you can see that there's a large dome in the middle, the rotunda. It's one Congress. But on either side of it, you can see two smaller domes. One of those is the Senate. One of those is the House of Representatives. So one building with two houses. But in order for a law to get passed, it needs to go through both.